Greetings from Norwich in the UK. My name is Tom Kiddle. I'm Director of NILE, Norwich Institute for Language Education. I'm delighted to wish all our colleagues in APIBA a happy 50th anniversary. Congratulations on reaching such an important milestone. We've been fortunate enough to work with teachers from Buenos Aires for much of our history, from our master's modules in Buenos Aires to attending many of your APIBA events. We think it's fantastic the work you're doing there, and we wish you continued success for the next 50 years. Thank you very much and enjoy your celebrations.
Remember your favourite teachers at school or lecturers at university who, by planting the seeds of curiosity and imagination and developing a real love of knowledge, inspired you to achieve more on your learning journey, helping you become the educator you are today. Now it's your turn to prepare students for successful lives in a more complex world. Imagine having the certainty that no matter how new discoveries transform our future, your students always have the right skills and knowledge to thrive in it. Appreciate different realities and viewpoints, to create a fairer and more inclusive vision of the world, and pass it on to future generations. At Macmillan Education, we make this happen by working hand in hand with teachers and academics, building on our long-standing heritage of innovation in literature, science and education. We connect, we innovate, we inspire.
Good morning again. Welcome everyone. So we're ready to kick off this wonderful birthday now with our plenarist, right? Joining us from Britain, Silvana Richardson, right? What a joy, what an honor to be hosting this wonderful presentation by our beloved member, Silvana, who has agreed to join us on this special occasion, right, for our conference. And thank you for making it possible to bring Silvana to this joyous occasion today, right? So Silvana has very kindly offered to do this for us. So thank you for being with us today, Silvana. From from the bottom of my heart, I'll always be grateful to you for joining us today. It's really such a joy to have you with us today, right? And your topic will be on collaborative approaches for learning and innovating together. I mean, central to the mission of an association such as ours, and so dear to your heart, as this was one of the first areas of research you explored as you grew in the profession, right? So very briefly, I'll tell you about Silvana, right? I could spend time telling you about her professional track record, but let's make it brief and start with where it all began, where she studied at Joaquín B. González. She's a graduate from Instituto Superior del Profesorado Joaquín B. González in Buenos Aires, and is now head of education at Bell UK, academic director of Bell Teacher, Bell Teacher. Sorry, I got mixed up here. Academic director of the Bell Teacher Academy in Cambridge, and strategic education advisor of the Bell Foundation, right? And as you know, she has co-written Cambridge papers in ELT and is author of a forthcoming book on professional development for OUP. And this is just a snippet of what her resume reads, right? Silvana, over to you. Thank you again. And to our wonderful audience today, simply enjoy. This is a great treat.
Thank you very much for such a warm welcome. Thank you, Paula. It's great to be here with you. It's good morning to you. It's good afternoon from me, from Cambridge, and not a very nice afternoon, actually, a bit rainy and not very autumnal. I would describe it as autumnal, really. Before I start, I just wanted to thank APIBA from the bottom of my heart, because for me, it's such a lovely organization, an organization that I know colleagues who have been members of La Comisión Directiva, and it's been always part of my professional development when I was in Argentina, and I've never lost touch. But more importantly, it's really great to be with you in this 50th anniversary. So thank you very much for inviting me. It's really much appreciated. As Paula said, my topic today is collaborative approaches for learning and innovating together. So I wanted to begin very briefly with a little bit of a warmer, and to get us to think together about how we go about learning with and from others, how we collaborate with peers as part of our professional development. So let's start with a bit of a chat box activity, and I'm going to be asking you to answer this question. What, if you can remember, what was the last thing you learned from a colleague, and when was it? So an example for me would be last Wednesday, I was reading and reviewing the work of a colleague who was designing a teacher training session, and she had included a model that I was absolutely not aware of how to analyze the language demands of subject teaching in a kind of more of a CLIL context. And that was my colleague, Sheila. So that's an example of the last thing I learned from a colleague and when. So if you want to take a second and answer that question in the chat, see if you remember, and I'll have a look at your responses. I've got, okay, today, that's fantastic. Technological tips, fantastic. Norali. There are so many names that I know, and former colleagues and friends. So this is amazing. Okay. Yesterday, Miriam, can you tell us more? Tons of stuff. Amalia, can I challenge you to be specific? What was the very last thing, this week, Romina, what was it? Can you remember? And how was it? Like I said, I was reading and reviewing the work of a colleague. Oh, she doesn't remember. I forgive you, Romina. Okay. Anybody else? Any other thoughts of, what did you learn? What exactly did you learn? And how exactly did you learn it? To give me a second, of course, you have all the time in the world. You have until 1 o'clock. Well, my time. No, 2 o'clock my time. Yesterday from Estela, a teacher I work with, tips on how to use Google Forms to personalize teaching. Thank you, Christina. Nice web pages with material this year. Okay, so can you tell me a little bit? Last Wednesday, I learned how to move chunks on the digital screen in the classroom, online game. So from apps, and yes, last Wednesday, oh yeah. Today, Romina told me some information about APIBA 6, how to write my name here. Well, that's good. A post this week from Dario Vanegas. Great if you can tell us what exactly, Silvia. Thank you. To analyze, fantastic. So a wide range of different activities, actually. And my second question for you is, in your experience, what contexts or formats are the most conducive for learning with and from colleagues, again, in a collaborative kind of space? So an example could be the water cooler moment, when two teachers are just having a conversation over a cup of tea or whatever, and it's kind of informal, but there's an aha moment there. So can you give me examples of what you consider to be the moments, the formats, the contexts, the approaches in which you learn the most with and from colleagues? So again, a minute for you to answer that. Interesting. Room chats, students, recess time, when it leads to reflection, during breaks. Yes, Eugenia, I can see that. Informal moments, Julieta says. Informal chats. There seems to be a little bit of consensus about informal, APIBA SIGs, in a SIG, at teachers' meetings, informal contexts, planning together, exchanging experiences, social media, in SIGs. Keep going. Thank you very much. What I think this shows us is the variety of experiences that teachers have and the variety of possible configurations and formats for learning with and from colleagues. So thank you ever so much. So the content, let's have a look at the content for today. I'm trying to move, that's it, so that you can see the whole screen. Right, okay, so first of all, the first section of my talk is about why learning together is even more important now than ever before, I would dare to say. The second part would be what research has to say about effective collaboration. The third part is me showing you and exploring with you 2 collaborative approaches for learning and innovating together as teachers. And I hope there is time for some questions and answers. So let's get started. So we're starting with why learning together is even more important now than ever before. And if this is an image from our school in London, and if you think about what happened with the pandemic at the start of the pandemic almost 2 years ago, is that many of us have had to close the schools where we worked and the environments where we worked had to close. And as a result, there was a little bit of a dispersal of that classroom or that school community where many of us were working together to isolation, if you like, and working from home and working remotely and not being able to socialize and to see our colleagues and to spend physical time with our colleagues. Of course, we know, and we've known even before the pandemic, that there are other works of working and other ways of collaborating, for example, online. But I think an important question to ask ourselves is how effectively has video conferencing software been able to create those communities of practice, if you like, those schools communities and staff rooms where we normally would learn from and with each other. And this is my next question for you. And I promise this is the last question that I'll ask you to answer right now. And the question here is, in your opinion, or in your experience, to what extent did we succeed in creating social spaces in virtual environments as we were learning to work and we were teaching in lockdown and we were learning together in lockdown from and with each other? So in other words, did these virtual and remote online learning environments, were they successful in helping us learn? So if you feel that that is really, that we succeed really well, you choose number 1, 2, okay on the whole, 3, not so well, 4, not at all, 5, don't know, not sure. So all I'm asking you to do now is to just pick a number, and I'll have a look at what you say. A lot of 1, really well, that's good news. Some 2s, a couple of 3s, and not sure. 3s, 2, 1. So clearly there's a spread of really well, okay on the whole, and not so well. But thankfully, there are no not at alls. So it means that we have made good progress really in how we engage with online environments. As we gradually emerge from lockdown teaching, lockdown learning, I am aware that in Buenos Aires, there's a wide variety. So there are teachers who went back to their schools since August. There are some who haven't gone back yet, some who have gone back for the first time for a final exam. So there's a variety. What I would say is, even as we all emerge and we go back to face-to-face settings, it's not over yet. We still need to see and feel the impacts and focus on recovery. And this has been, we should not underestimate the impact of what lockdown teaching and learning has done for the teaching profession. It's been one of the most disruptive, exhausting, stressful times for teachers. They have also been, wonderful in terms of harnessing creativity, and it's been a very creative moment in which we really developed our skills. But as we open, I think it's really important to ask ourselves that question again. How can we support each other after so much uncertainty and isolation? And I think it's a question that many organizations, including teaching organizations, many schools, many academic managers, teacher educators, and teachers are asking themselves, how can we support each other after so much uncertainty and so much isolation? And one frequent answer, and a very important answer, I would say, is to focus even more on teacher well-being. And why do I say even more? Even before the pandemic, there has been a very strong focus on teacher burnout, and how busy and manic, if you like, a teacher's life can be. And I would dare to say even more so in Buenos Aires, with the concrete reality of el profesor taxi, la profesora taxi, going here, there, working in more than one place to make ends meet, etc. So it is an understandable response. Of course, it's an important response. And here I want to use a quote from one of my colleagues, Anna, from the Bell Cambridge School. I asked all my colleagues to share with me what sources of professional development they sought during lockdown learning and teaching. And Anna says, I went to several webinars on teacher well-being and resilience. And she said she appreciated the ideas that were given in those professional events, but also reassurance, because it was important to her to feel that what she was doing was okay. And she got that reassurance from those events. But interestingly, one of the things that I noticed as I was collating responses from all my colleagues was that we know that teachers are different and that they react to events in different ways. So I wanted also to share with you these two responses from these other two colleagues that show a different view. So have a look. I'm going to let you read these two responses in silence. So as you can see, different ideas and different views, which I think it's really important as well to understand that kind of variety of reactions. And also, I wanted to share with you Cabañas and Ilusi's ideas about focusing on well-being as an individual endeavor, which is important, but they say that approaches to well-being draw on positive psychology, as you know, and positive psychology, and that's the way they worded it, chooses to focus, I would say focuses on happiness or well-being rather than more social concerns such as solidarity, and that it articulates an underlying individualism and a narrow sense of the social. So that's why I'm thinking that as we emerge from the pandemic, while it is really, really important to take care of ourselves and our well-being and take concrete steps against burnout, this is not sufficient. There's something also very important to be done about restoring those communities and coming back together to learn together and to benefit from being in each other's presence in professional learning settings. So, as I said, learning together is crucial. And this is, again, Anna's summary of what it meant to her to be able to learn throughout the pandemic, but also as we emerge in the pandemic with her colleagues. So she says, I felt like I was part of a team learning together, trying to get through the challenges that we were all facing. And for her, it was really important, this feeling that we were all in it together in some way. And I think it's APIBA that it really has a very important role in promoting and creating and generating these environments where teachers can get together and that are conducive to deep teacher learning. So thank you really for APIBA's role, throughout these 50 years and the future. So let's move on to what research has to say about effective collaboration. The first thing to say is, well, why is it good to collaborate? So research findings coincide, and interesting here that modal auxiliary there, that peer support and collaboration may promote development. More about this in a minute. And the explanation that Collin and Smith give is that peers share a common language, a common culture, and knowledge regarding the problems that they face. If you think about a school, and the systems and the procedures that a school has, there's an idiosyncratic culture in each institution or organization. Also, the way we were trained, if we were all trained pretty much within the same tradition of profesorados, we share this common language, and meta language and knowledge. And this is why it's easy to collaborate with each other. But also, I think, and a very interesting point is that colleagues and peers can provide, interestingly, they say emotional or informational assistance. I would say that colleagues can provide emotional and or informational assistance that supports a teacher in improving their practice. Now, of course, when I say effective collaboration, I think it's really important to define and to have a clear and common understanding of what we mean by effective collaboration. And what I'm going to share is what's currently the thinking within the professional development community and research. And it's this idea that we equate effective with impactful. And what do I mean by impactful collaboration? When collaboration between teachers as part of their professional development leads to transferable teacher learning. In other words, that what we learn with our groups, with our communities, with our workmates, etc., helps us enact what we learn in the program into our own practice so that it actually leads to better student learning. That is not just an intellectual exercise, because we are teachers to, it's a relational role, isn't it? We are teachers to teach our learners, and the ultimate goal of our activity is definitely good teacher learning, and therefore our professional development activity ultimately should lead to better and improved teacher learning. So what has research got to say? And when I say research here, I don't just mean the odd individual report here and there, but I've drawn up on what's sometimes known as meta research. So, for example, systematic reviews that summarize a number of research studies with very robust and rigorous selection processes in terms of what methods they had been used, etc., etc. So it's rather robust. And the first finding here that's really important is that not all forms of collaboration between teachers are equally impactful. What this means is that some forms of collaboration between teachers are more effective than others, which takes me to the next point. That in terms of factors that positively affect professional development, collaboration is necessary. However, it's not sufficient, and it is linked both to positive and negative outcomes. In other words, some forms of collaboration improve teacher learning, leading to improvements in student learning, others don't. So that's why it's so important to understand and get to the bottom of what is impactful collaboration and what is not. So to help us remind ourselves of what effective collaboration looks like, or if you like, the building blocks of effective collaboration, I came back with a mnemonic, which is the verb to seep, which, as you know, is to kind of penetrate, if you like, or to filter down. So if we think of that idea of permeation or penetration as water in a field, it makes the field fruitful, it makes the field productive. So that's the idea of effective collaboration. So let's have a look. The S in SEEP, it stands for structured, and by structured it means a structure of collaboration that is all about supporting others and being supported by peers, but rather than unplanned or informal or ad hoc or idiosyncratic. And I can almost hear you think and say, well, hang on a minute, we've just said how the water cooler moment and the informal conversation are really good sources of professional development. And I would agree with you. And what happens here is that it's not necessarily that unplanned or informal or ad hoc or these idiosyncratic forms of collaboration are not effective. This is more about, unless you structure collaboration, if you're an organization, it's very difficult to set it up. And unless you structure collaboration, it's very difficult to research it. So this is more to do with the impact of research and of organizations trying to help teachers collaborate more than anything else. The second letter, E, stands for experimental. And this is all about teachers trying out, refining, and embedding new approaches together. So the idea here is that we collaborate in order to innovate. And, you know, there's a very strong message in the research about if we keep doing what we've always done, is not really going to be a very impactful collaboration. And we're not going to innovate, obviously. The second E is for evidence rich. And this doesn't mean, or just mean, if you like, all about academic research or applying academic research. Yes, of course, there is a place for that, evidence-informed and evidence-engaged practice. But this is more about teachers studying, noticing, observing and interpreting how their students are responding to the changes promoted by the new approaches with which they're innovating. So this is serious noticing, and it goes beyond what some teachers sometimes say, oh, I just look at my students and I know that it worked, or I know that it's not working. This is much more serious than that. More about this later. And finally, the P stands for problem-based. Basically, effective collaboration focuses on inquiry and problem solving. More about this in a minute. So here are some representative quotes from different important research studies. This is Professor Mary James, who's led one of the most, I would say, the largest scale studies about effective professional development. And she says that collaborative classroom-focused inquiry has greater power to change classroom practices and learning outcomes for the better than any other factor. It is one of the most powerful ways of improving not just teacher learning, but also student learning. And again, she links that inquiry to tackling a real issue or a problem in teachers' practice, and the aim is to develop practical solutions. So, you know, responses, strategies, etc., to help you tackle that problem. And then the structure that she recommends is a process involving an action research or inquiry cycle of investigation, action, evaluation, and refinement. More about this later. But just a kind of quick reminder, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with this idea. It's not new, of action research or inquiry cycles where we investigate something, we plan how to implement it, we act, we observe and evaluate, and then we reflect, and refine, and off we go to cycle 2 with a refined plan, and all it goes again. Philip Accordingly, one of the authors of one of the, again, most influential systematic reviews of research and professional development, says that it is working through and reviewing together the effects of activities that disturb the status quo that helps teachers review their approaches. So it is by doing this, by implementing together, but also by evaluating what impacts the new approaches, the new strategies are having, that teachers review their approaches, but not just their approaches and their way of doing things in classrooms, virtual or physical, but more importantly, their beliefs and their assumptions through a fresh and reflective pair of eyes. And finally, Doris Santoro says that, and this is where I think it chimes and resonates with what I was saying before about isolation and the importance of getting back together after the lockdown learning in the pandemic, that whenever teachers are brought in to investigate, to find solutions and to develop interventions, whatever that you means, if you're a manager in a language school, if you're a teacher educator, if you're a teaching association, if you are a couple of teachers deciding to get together, are creating opportunities for authentic community and taking action in a way that feels less isolating. So, what kind of possible ways of collaborating can we have? And here again, Colin and Smith proposed 3 possibilities, going from the kind of relying on the expert on the left-hand side to the most basic and potentially less intensive and therefore cheaper approaches. You know, expert can come at a price and an intensity. So number 1, a coaching relationship. And in this coaching relationship, it's an expert coach that provides peer support and assistance. In the middle, you can have something along the lines of regular conference calls between teachers. And this is where teachers discuss how they are finding the process of learning and the innovation and, you know, kind of working through the difficulties that they might have implementing a new strategy or approach. And at the most basic level, at least 2 colleagues taking part in training or professional development together. And the aim of having more than 1 colleague here is that they can support each other throughout implementation. I cannot underestimate the importance of this point of the support and the collaboration throughout the implementation of new approaches. By contrast, it's also very important to understand what unimpactful collaboration is like. And here, accordingly tells us, number 1, that unimpactful collaboration focuses on describing and sharing existing practices rather than defining new ones. The second point is when collaboration focuses on the teacher. So all eyes are on the teacher, teacher technique, an improvement of teaching strategy, but we're not really looking at students, basically at the impact that those strategies have on the learner's learning, whether it's, you know, helping or hindering, and what are the students getting out of that. And the third point that Philip accordingly makes is that collaboration is not impactful when it builds a professional learning community as an end in itself, rather than as a means, if you like, or an environment in which it is safe to explore evidence. So really important to remember these things. So if we go back, the first point said that it focuses on describing and sharing existing practices as an example of collaboration that is not necessarily impactful. So let's try for a second to understand why activities like sharing good practice are not necessarily very impactful collaboration. And I know this may come as a surprise because a lot of professional development is predicated on the concept of sharing good practice. Now, the first problem is the slippery notion of good practice. What does good practice mean? Good practice according to whom or according to what? Is good practice for Leonor equally good practice for Virginia in the context that they work? So there are lots of problems around the idea of good practice, but fundamentally, who says so? So let me give you a quick example. So let's imagine we are doing a collaborative event where we've got 3 teachers sharing good practice. So the first teacher is Daniel, and he, you know, this is, let's imagine it's in the context of a tech, as we say here in England, a teach meet where teachers get together and they share good practice. So Danny spends 20 minutes telling and showing some of his colleagues how he's using Canva to produce materials, etc. And then comes Maria, where she shows her colleagues how she uses Mentimeter for assessment for learning purposes. And then in comes Florencia, where she shows her colleagues for another 20 minutes how she's been using Padlet. Now, the first problem with this is clearly one of excessive cognitive load. You know, it's just 60 minutes of too much information, but equally superficial coverage. That content cannot possibly be explored in any depth so that it leads to deep learning that can be transferred to practice. It's kind of left. I'm not saying that it's impossible to learn and to transfer. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that it's left to individual teachers' intention and desire to try it out. And I think it's really important here to look at and trying to think about what teachers learn for. And here I'm drawing on David Weston and Bridget Clay's work around training outcomes. So bear with me for a second, because I'll link this back with effective collaboration. The first purpose for which teachers learn, say Weston and Clay, and the most basic, if you like, is to understand concepts and theories and to be aware of new ideas. And this is where there's a lot of sharing good practices, more new ideas. I want inspiration. I want to be aware of what other people are doing. And this is what Weston and Clay call awareness and inspiration as an outcome of a professional development activity. A second possible purpose of collaborating to learn could be to operate systems and procedures. In other words, to use something, to learn how to use something or how to apply something to your practice. To be able to do two, you need to have done one first, of course. And then number three, which depends on the other two levels, is to implement, to refine, to evaluate, and to embed new practices. And this is what Weston and Clay call direct impact on teachers' learning. Only when you get to level 3 does what you have learned impact on your can impact or has the potential to impact on your students' learning. So let me give you an example, and please take this as just as an example, because sometimes when we give examples in talks of this nature, we get carried away with the nature of the example. And this is, as I say, it's just an example. What I want us to focus on is on, what we achieve by awareness and inspiration, etc. So I've chosen this example because this is an activity we've been doing at Bell over the last few months. Just in case, I'll clarify what I mean by hybrid teaching. I'm not talking about blended. I'm talking about teaching and learning where some of the students are face-to-face in the classroom together with the teacher, and some other students are joining us remotely online. That's what I mean by hybrid teaching. So, for example, a collaborative professional development activity on hybrid teaching could include the following topics. I'll let you read them in silence, sorry, for a second. And Professor Mary Kennedy would say that a lot of teacher development activity and a lot of professional learning activity by teachers stops here. And she describes this as the problem of enactment. She says that sometimes professional development programs that involve collaboration among teachers are about teachers getting together in a room, physical or virtual, to talk about teaching and learning, whereas their activity takes place in the classroom. So sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect between what they talk about in the professional development activity and what they actually do. So it doesn't find its way to transferability into their practices. So if we take this example of hybrid learning into beyond awareness and inspiration, and we want us and our colleagues to learn to use and apply a new approach, this is what professional development activities would do. So this is actually what we did. For example, at Bell, we used Zoom and Conference Cam webcam, which is that it looks like a periscope, that camera that can follow the teacher and the students as they talk and act. But I'll let you read in silence. So as you can see here, we move away, or beyond, if you like, rather than away, from understanding how to work and we are rehearsing, and we are understanding what the issues can be, not just in terms of the technology, but also in terms of the group dynamics. And we are beginning to plan that innovation, and we are giving each other feedback. So we're planning together and we're giving each other feedback. So if we move to level 3, this is what presumably it would look like. Oops, sorry. So have a look for a second. So as you can see here, we move towards a model of implementing, experimenting, but also collaborating throughout the difficulties of implementation and in a sustained way. So if we go back to the 3 different outcomes of teacher learning, and we think of collaboration as a form of professional development activity, when we collaborate because all we want is to just be aware of something new and we want some inspiration, one-off input here might be sufficient. So a webinar, that's it. But if we really want to together to learn to use something, then we need to increase the amount of collaboration. And we need to change the activities. It's not just about listening to someone or watching a video or watching a presentation. It's also about multiple opportunities to do stuff like rehearsing, observing each other, practicing, even before we actually experiment, and getting feedback. Now, what we really want is that learning is transferable to our practice, then there's even more increase in terms of the level of experimentation and sustained collaboration. So here we are planning jointly, we are teaching and then coming back and talking about it, but we may also be co-teaching and we may be evaluating together. So if we really want impact from collaboration, the activities we should be looking at are more at level 3, direct impact. And of course, to be able to get to level 3, as I said before, you need to go through 1 and 2. So going back to why sharing good practice is an impactful collaboration. Mainly because after 60 minutes of talking, like I'm doing right now, all you can get is awareness and inspiration. It's very unlikely that it will lead to use an application. And if it does, it's not because we have been collaborating and supporting each other through the difficulties of implementation, but it's just working on my own motivation really as an individual. And then, of course, it doesn't necessarily lead to impact on learners' learning. So let's now move on to 2 possible collaborative approaches for learning and innovating. I have chosen here 2. There are many more than that. I'm sure you are aware of other approaches, for example, collaborative action research. But I think these are the ones that have a lot of potential and have been proven to lead to impact. So the first one I'll be talking about is lesson study. I'm not sure whether you are familiar with it or not. And the second one is supported experiments. So let's begin with lesson study. Lesson study, interestingly enough, is not new. Lesson study was developed over 150 years ago in Japan. But it was in the last decades that lesson study began to be applied beyond Japan. So in Europe, particularly in the UK and in the United States, but also throughout Asia. And Professor Peter Dudley was the academic responsible for bringing it to the UK, and he defines it quite vaguely here as a highly specified form of classroom action research focusing on the development of teaching practice knowledge. So I've also brought Dr. John Meinert's definition, which I think is a little bit more specific. He defines this as a trial space, so a space for experimentation where ideas can be created and explored and innovation can take place. So let's be more concrete. First of all, the first thing about lesson study is that teachers typically work in triads, so groups of 3 teachers. So what do they do together? They plan together what they call research lessons, And this may involve extended preparation, for example, some training or some reading together or collaboration of any other sort. Then they take it in turns to teach these research lessons. So when one teacher teaches, the other two observe. And then they analyze the findings from the observation. They record their findings to inform further planning. It's quite simple, actually. And it's about face-to-face or live online. You can do it both ways. Now, minimally, in lesson study, there are 3 cycles. The first cycle is about a first meeting where this group of 3 teachers decide what they want to improve together. And ideally, it should be something that the 3 teachers are really interested in working on. And as I said, this can take place face-to-face or online. So they jointly plan the first research lesson. One teacher teaches, the other 2 observe the first research lesson. And again, this can happen face-to-face or online. Interestingly here, it's really important to include student voice because this is all about impact on learning. So they interview the students and then they have the post-discussion and initial plans for the second research lesson. So the second cycle is exactly the same and the third cycle is exactly the same. The interesting thing is that at the end of the third cycle, then teachers are in a position where they can report their findings to their colleagues as well. So quite simple. I think what really matters and what's quite distinctive about lesson study is the focus of those observations I was mentioning. And the focus is actually less on the teacher and much more on the learners. And let me show you how. So let's have a look at evaluation questions that Professor Dudley proposes and a possible form to analyze that information. I'll let you read in silence for a second. So as you can see, they talk about case pupils. And the idea is that, for example, if I'm teaching, my colleague number 1 will be evaluating and will be observing one case pupil, who would be representative of, say, gifted and talented student. Case pupil B would be, for example, representative of a disadvantaged learner, a learner having difficulties, etc. Case pupil C could be a representative of an average learner, etc. So the idea is that you stay with the learner and you observe the learner. One of our colleagues was part of a triad of lesson study, and these are his comments about it. That's Ken. And he said that lesson study helped put the focus solidly on the students' learning, because as I said, the planning, the teaching, the observing, the interpreting, the analyzing is all about the learners, as opposed to perceived teaching needs. And he said it was interesting, and interestingly enough, he said it was much less stressful to carry out research focused on student learning rather than on teaching, because the eyes were not on him, the eyes were on learning. He said we learned much about focusing on the learner, collaborating as teachers, and taking and incorporating learner feedback, another very important element of lesson study. But also he said a major positive was working closely with fellow teachers, collaboration. It was motivating and inspiring. You can learn so much in terms of other ideas and perspectives. And this is an article that he published in Modern English Teacher after his first attempt at lesson study, which is quite interesting. And if you want to download it, that's the link. But also, if you're interested in exploring lesson study in more depth, just type lesson study, a handbook by Peter Dudley on Google, and you will be able to download a very, very useful handbook. And I've just looked yesterday, there's also another handbook for doing lesson study entirely online. So over to the last part, which is supported experiments, the second approach. Supported experiments were first developed by Jeff Petty in 2006, and he defines it again as an approach to teacher development that provides an opportunity for teachers to try out, there we are, new strategies again, innovation, with support of a peer or expert colleague. There you go, that's a collaboration aspect, who takes on a coaching role, aids reflection, and provides feedback. So, very briefly, what happens during a supported experiment? So we've got a teacher trying a new strategy, a strategy that's new to them. It doesn't have to be revolutionary, it's something that's new to them. Now, the interesting aspect of supported experiments is that the experiment is adapted and repeated. And Petty says that there's beauty and virtue, if you like, in repetition, because it's not doing the same thing again and again, but it's learning about the repetition. So doing things better. And the experiment is repeated until teacher and students are used to the new strategy. And that's where the teacher decides, okay, enough now. But during the trial, the teacher has, throughout the trial, the teacher has supported discussions and conversations, and that's the collaborative dimensions about the experiment, and receives feedback and coaching. And then the teacher reports back to other teachers so that they too can learn from the trial. So to summarize, one more comment is that you can do it as an experiment as an individual with peer support in the discussions and conversations, but alternatively, you can carry out experiments in teams. So you 2 or 3 or 4 teachers are working on the same aspect, and they provide support for each other. So the cycle of supported experiments. Have a look for a second, and then I'll talk very briefly and give you an example about each of the stages. Okay, so stage number 1, explore context. So at this stage, teachers consider key issues and problems and puzzles that impact on learning given their own context. So the course that the courses that they teach, the learners that they teach, the school where they teach, etc. So going back to the example of hybrid teaching, my colleague Anna was a bit concerned, well, quite concerned actually, when we started teaching hybrid lessons about grouping. And she felt that grouping students successfully was highly problematic because on the one hand, you had the online students all working remotely, and it was very easy to group them together on breakout rooms in Zoom. And then you had the face-to-face teachers in class with her. And what she felt was that the groups were fixed and that there was very little variation. So, for example, if there were 3 online students, that was their lot, that was their group, and they were constantly working with the same students. But equally, it was hard to get the 2 groups, i.e. the online group and the face-to-face group, to gel and to work together as a whole class. She said it feels like 2 mini classrooms or 2 mini environments, but not one whole class. So that was the exploration of context. The second stage is to explore present practice. So this is where teachers think about how they teach at present. So Anna said that in group work activities, she grouped online students together in breakout groups, and then face-to-face students together. So this is, if you like, the configuration. So you had face-to-face group 1, with all students face-to-face, face-to-face group 2, online group 1, online group 2. And she said, hang on a minute, well, it does work during the activity, but as I said before, the groups remain the same and it feels like 2 separate classes rather than 1. So stage 3 is about exploring pedagogy. So here we look beyond our present practice and teachers find out and or identify other possible new strategies that they could use that might lead to better learning. Now, this might require some reading, looking around, research, talking to our colleagues, other colleagues, etc. In Anna's particular example, there was little to look at elsewhere because everything we were reading, all the webinars we were attending were saying this is the way to work with groups. We didn't have any other possibilities. So in a discussion between her and I, we came up with this idea of putting the students into hybrid groups. So not just a hybrid class where you had the online students and the face-to-face students, but within that hybrid class, to set up hybrid groups. So group one would have a mixture of face-to-face students and online students in a breakout room, and then group two would also be hybrid, etc. Stage 4 is planning the experiment. So here, teachers decide which new teaching strategy they will be trialing and how. So in Anna's example, it was quite a complex preparation, actually, because it meant many different things. So first of all, she needed to plan and arrange a test to make sure that these hybrid groups within a hybrid class worked or not. Now, this wasn't simple because we needed to have colleagues working online and colleagues working face-to-face. So she needed 6 different colleagues helping here. And there was a mixture of teachers, our IT manager, the academic manager, etc. Then she set up and prepared the technology. And this meant not just her own technology, her own Zoom account and her own webcam. It also meant that we wanted to try whether different types of technology would work equally well. So reminding our colleagues to bring a tablet or a laptop or a phone and Android and Apple, etc., etc. Then we ran the test. And we evaluated the test with colleagues. It was a very interesting test because one of the learnings was that bringing their own device, students bringing their own device wasn't going to work because it was quite complicated. There were barriers in terms of Wi-Fi, in terms of how they were accessing the information, etc. You know, what looking at a worksheet from a phone was tricky, etc. So we tweaked and we ran adaptation past our call. So we kind of, after evaluating, Anna went and tweaked her test and she ran the adaptation past us. She ran a second test in this case. And then she went on to plan the first series of lessons. And then she designed the experiment evaluation. So how was she going to find out whether the students were getting a good deal out of hybrid groups? So this is an example of how to plan an experiment. It could be completely different, but depending on the experiment. Next is to carry out the supported experiment. And here the teachers experiment with the new strategy while receiving support from peers. And in this case, this is what happened with Anna. So she implemented hybrid groups in the first cycle, and the out-of-class collaboration were regular supportive discussions with me. And she asked me and another colleague to go and observe her lesson, her hybrid lesson with hybrid groups at the end of the first week, because she wanted to take a bit of time to for hybrid groups to become, if you like, normal, for everybody to familiarize with the hybrid groups, etc. So we went and observed and gave her feedback, and we together agreed on an action plan for adaptations. And then Anna developed a second cycle of improved implementation with hybrid groups. So very briefly, the tweak for cycle 2 was, this is the feedback that we gave her, that the hybrid groups allowed students to interact, participate, and complete tasks together smoothly, that the students knew exactly what to do. It was really impressive and got on with it efficiently, and that everyone had normalized the procedure. It looked like they've been working in hybrid groups forever. But that face-to-face students were dominating speaking turns. And this was a pattern. You know, in each breakout group, we realized that it was the face-to-face students that were dominating at the expense of online students. So what we agreed as an adaptation was to introduce elements of cooperative learning in terms of roles when working in hybrid groups, so that different students had different responsibilities and the participation level was more even. So this is what Anna tweaked. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but she basically gave different students different roles. Have a look for a second. And it really doesn't matter. This is just an example, okay? What matters is the methodology for trying to solve a problem, working through the problem together, finding the solutions, testing and experimenting, supporting and being supported. And then comes the sharing strategies, where teachers report on the experiment and on what they have learned. Now, given what I've said about sharing good practices, what we decided to go with was a series of professional development sessions that went beyond sharing good practice, so that there was awareness of inspiration. This is how you can work with hybrid groups, but also let's learn how to use hybrid groups, which was quite a complicated setup. And then let's look at the group dynamics and the pedagogy to make sure that you use them successfully to improve learners' learning. Finally, this means that if the CPD is deep enough and it's collaborative enough, then that leads to practice that is embedded, i.e. that teachers agree to implement new and improved strategies. So I'm coming just to an end. And what I would say is it's in your power to drive this way of collaborating. At Bell, we have been working in this way with different approaches to collaborative professional development for many years now in different configurations. As I said, supported experiments, lesson study, action research, etc., collaborative action research. And we are quite happy about the impact we have seen. It has become, embedded improved teaching for embedded improved learning. So what I would say is, if you are a manager or if you're a teacher educator, it's in your power to create structures and environments where collaboration can happen. There are different ways of collaborating, different intensities, different budgets, but there's always a way of collaborating. And if you're a teacher, I would say, don't settle for suboptimal professional development experiences and suboptimal ways of collaborating. And as an organization as well, as I say, this is not something just important for, say, SIGs, i.e. special interest groups, focused on methodology or on research. These approaches can absolutely be adopted by any special interest group. For example, Business English could benefit from trying exam, just to give you an example, or young learners, etc. So, we've got a bit of time, Romina, or not? One question, or is it time to stop? Romina or Paula, sorry, over to you.
You have time for one question, one or
Fantastic,
two questions.
Romina.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So people, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box and I will read them to Silvana.
In the meantime, I'm looking at your comments.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Silvana, for this enlightening opening plenary.
Yeah, amazing, right? Thank you so much. I mean, so well structured and organized, so clear, right? And this is perhaps how we move from that informal water cooler chat to real, measurable, evidence-based collaborative learning. Very, very clear. You gave us a 1 hour primer that I believe will be very, very useful to us all, right? And now the challenge is to go and take it wherever we work to see if this, first and foremost.
Excuse me, Pauli, there is one question for Silvana by Patricia Brusco, and she says, what is the best argument to convince institution owners to adopt this method?
What is the best argument is, I would say professional development is a very expensive undertaking, because you invest time, you invest money, teachers invest their own time, their own dedication, their own effort. And if you want, if you want results, just going for, let's read about something, let's have a number of webinars, etc., is not really going to lead to much. So if you're going to invest in professional development, you might as well invest in effective professional development. That would be my argument.
Okay, thank you, Sil. Christina Banfi asks, do you think this kind of professional development is possible in any context? What would you say are the requirements? For example, in terms of time, resources devoted, etc.?
I would say, thank you, Christina. I would say it very much depends on the time that teachers have available and the means. So time, that I know that teachers are very busy, but one of the things that really impresses me about teachers in Buenos Aires is that even though they're very, very, very busy, they always have or make time for professional development. So tapping into that and using, for example, online environments, because it's difficult to find a time for them to meet face-to-face, etc. The other thing I would say is the culture has got to be right. The organizational culture has got to be right. And for the organizational culture to being right, I mean that the senior management and managers and the leaders support this and don't just support it nominally, but they are invested in it and they actually attend and are present, etc. I would say some, as I said, there are different methods, from a very light touch to teachers attend something and then they hold each other's hands through trying to implement, to a much more complex, let's bring the expert, coach, spend money on that, and a more sustained intervention. So there are different ways and there are different approaches, but I would say the most light touch is possible, and it's better than just let's watch webinars until the cows come home.
Thank you, Silvana. And one last question by a student teacher. Theo asks, would you please give us some advice to students that are now being trained to become teachers?
Oh, that's a very general question. Thank you.
It is.
I wonder advice about what? What I would say is work with others. This is all about collaborate to innovate. So teaching can be a very isolating experience if you go from one school to the other and you just walk in, do your lesson, and close the door and go to the other school or the other. So always be part of a community and listen to your colleagues. And for me, what I get most out of it is the interaction, the buzz of thinking together, of saying, oh, we've got this problem, what do we do about this? And just the kind of the buzz of, oh, we could do this, we could do that, we could do that. Oh, okay, so what are we going to do? And learning from others. Don't isolate yourself. That would be what I would say.
Okay, thank you very much, Silvana. And a message to you all in the chat. I have copied again the link to our website. At 11:15, we're having concurrent sessions by our APIBA 6. So you're kindly invited to go and choose the session of your choice and access that at 11:15. See you in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvana, so much for this wonderful presentation. It's going to be, definitely one of those memories we'll all have of our APIBA events. Thank you so much. And
thank you for having me.